Hey guys, Erica Sakosio here with the Childcare Director's Chair podcast. We are so happy you hit that play button today. We talk a lot about leadership on our podcast. And today I was really thinking about great leaders really support their team, support their teachers, support their parents, and support their children. And being a childcare owner myself, we service children ages infant up to school age, but they're really needs a lot of support around those toddlers. So toddlers are very interesting. They remind me of little teenagers. They are very risky. They are very fast. They're very inquisitive, which is wonderful. We love that about them. But you really got to be on your game. Also, another thing that happens quite frequently in childcare settings, or even not in childcare settings, but anytime when you have a group of children playing together, sometimes biting happens or pushing happens. And sometimes that is because children are not able to communicate with each other. Sometimes there are speech issues. And so today's guest, we are joined with Jill Urbane. She is a coach. She helps parents. She does parent coaching. She does resources for families that have children who are toddlers and also teachers. She has lots of cheat sheets and many things that she'll talk about towards the end of the show. But I asked her to come on to talk a little bit about helping toddlers who might be struggling with speech, having some different strategies, or how to just have a supportive environment. Because again, if you're the leader of the program, lots of times people are looking to you as the expert. And you might not be a speech expert like who we have today on the show, but you want to make sure that you have the best resources possible. And even sharing this podcast today with your staff to give them a little bit more insight, tips, strategies, tips that can help them do a great job. So welcome to the show, Jill.
Thank you so much, Erica. I am so excited to be here. I love being able to talk, especially to people in the realm of daycare and early childhood centers.
Yeah. So what made you decide to do this? What made you
Well,
decide to start start working with toddlers and being an expert in toddlers?
well, it's funny. It was never on my radar. I had always planned on. I'm a social worker by training, a licensed clinical social worker, and I always planned on working with adults. And I ended up working in a prison with young adults, and then from there, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to keep them out of prison, these young men? So I thought maybe if I work for child welfare, I can have an impact. So I started working for child welfare and did that as a CPS worker for about 5 years, and then I found a love of being in people's homes because it's so real. And
Yeah.
I decided I was tired of worrying about everybody else's kids because I had my own. And then I got into early intervention by fluke. I begged the special ed director to give me a job, and I've been hooked ever since. It's going on year 26 for me. Love working with toddlers. Who
Wow.
knew?
Yeah. You never know what your calling is until all of a sudden it's boom, it's right there in your face. So
Yeah.
and I'm so happy to have you here too, because as a childcare owner, it is honestly the toddler room is where a lot of the challenges come from, I hate to say. And my
Mm-hmm.
poor staff, that's really the team that needs the most support. And even when I'm hiring, a lot of times when people come in, they're like, I'll do infants, I'll do pre-K, I'll do school age, any age but toddlers. And so when somebody comes in and applies and says, this is the true story, they come in
Uh,
and they apply to be a toddler teacher, I say, you are a unicorn. You are a magical unicorn. When people come in and say, yeah, I've worked in a toddler room for 15 years, 20 years, I'm like, no interview needed. Let's go. But all jokes aside, yeah, I mean, you understand as somebody who
mhm.
works, specifically focused on this age group, there are some unique challenges, right? Because they are very independent. So they think, right? They want to do
Mhm.
everything themselves, although they may not have the skill to do it, right? You got the
Yep.
potty training, beginning to talk, beginning to walk. There's just to me, it's fascinating how much changes in that year and a half. It
Oh, yeah.
really is extraordinary. So,
Yeah, they're really quite
so can,
amazing.
yes, they definitely are. They definitely are. So, can you explain some common signs or indicators that would help somebody understand if it is a speech delay in a toddler?
Well, so the first common sign that most people notice is limited vocabulary. And I want to point out before I talk about some of these that speech delays are the number one developmental delay for young children, more than any other area. So I love to be able to talk with folks about this because it is so important. So the first thing that people notice would be a limited vocabulary. They may have a smaller range of words compared to other kids in their age group. Another sign would be if you see a little one in your childcare center who seems to be doing okay, but then over time, the other kids seem to be gaining more and more words, and this one is kind of staying the same. So lack of progress would be something that folks should watch out for. Difficulty understanding instructions. This is a big one that I think a lot of people get so focused when they're talking about speech on the words that kids are using that they don't focus on the comprehension piece. And I have to understand words and what they mean in order to use them. So if I can't point to pictures in a picture book or go get a familiar object like a ball, when you point, like, go get the ball, Joey, and I can't do that at a certain age when it's developmentally appropriate, then those could be indicators of a concern in the area of communication, particularly comprehension. Another sign could be limited use of gestures, kids who aren't pointing or reaching to communicate their wants and needs. And then finally, maybe a preference for the nonverbal communication. These are those kids who are really good with using gestures and they can communicate a whole sentence without saying a word. I had a little boy one time, I asked him where his socks were, and he went, the sign socks, and he said upstairs, and then he said in his drawer, all without saying a word. So sometimes kids get so good at using the nonverbal communication that they don't realize that the words are going to make their life easier. And then obviously behavioral issues. We see a lot of frustration from little ones who aren't able to communicate their wants and needs. And then one of the more obvious ones for some of the older kids is difficulty with pronunciation and intelligibility.
Yeah. Do you think that there has been an increase? And I don't wanna guess, but your since this is your area of expertise, do you feel that there's been an increase since the pandemic on children having delays with speeches for the last 3 or 4 years?
I would say, just in my limited experience here in my little local area, that I've seen a
Yeah.
significant increase in children with delays in general,
Yeah.
particularly social emotional with regulation or social interaction
Mhm.
and communication, for sure.
Yeah. I have too. That's why I asked the question.
Hmm.
I've been in the field for 24, almost 25 years. And I would say, the last 3 or 4 years, I've noticed a difference for many children having, some struggles as
Hmm.
well. Yeah, definitely impulse, or
Oh,
like you
yeah.
said too, maybe not even understanding what you're asking of them.
Hmm.
This Saturday, we just had an ABA training for my entire team just
Oh,
to see
nice.
what types of things we could do in the physical environment to help support the children and the teachers, honestly, so everybody can kind of use multiple ways to communicate with each other, like you said, picture cues, or a sign that shows how many children can go in an area, a picture
Hmm.
schedule, so that they can hear it and see it and point, and several different ways to communicate. So yeah, I think
Beautiful.
it's important. And yeah, I think leaders need to be aware. We juggle so many things, but I think this is really important. Folks talk about finding staff, um, or staff not staying, and this
Hmm.
could be one of the things, right? Because children are having more challenges now,
Oh, yeah.
and the teachers are not quite equipped. And it's not, again,
Hmm.
even if you've been in the field for like 20 years, and
Hmm.
this is new, you may not have the same experience. So
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
and I've got to say I've been in this field, working in early intervention with toddlers and preschoolers for 26 years now. What kids were like 26 years ago and what kids are like today. It used to be back in the day in
yeah,
our preschool program that, and it was a special education preschool program, that there were like one or two kids out of 12 that had those really
hmm,
challenging behaviors. And so it was much easier for
yeah,
staff to support and have tools and strategies. And I would say
yeah,
now it's like two kids who don't have issues with regulation and sensory and all of that. It's
yeah,
like they're all just really struggling. It's like their
yeah.
development is just all discombobulated now.
Yeah, and it's hard too because especially when you're trying to use something like peer models in a classroom, and like you
Hmm.
said, if it's so lopsided one way or the other, now it's lopsided where there may be more children with delays than children who typically developing, and so it's hard to do peer models because what I have noticed is if you have 3 or 4 children who, are having struggling with behaviors, then other children start to copy and mimic those behaviors. Because again, we know that children learn from each other. They don't just learn
Hmm.
from the teachers, they learn
That's
from
right.
everybody in their environment. Yeah,
Yep.
so it's really important. What are the potential impacts of untreated speech delays on a child's overall development in learning in early childhood education setting?
Well, obviously, like you were just mentioning, behavioral issues. Kids with speech delays can, exhibit more behavioral issues like frustration. It could be withdrawal or acting out due to their communication difficulties. So certainly the behavioral piece. It also affects their social skills. It can limit their ability to interact with peers and adults. It can lead to potential difficulties with social situations and forming relationships, which we don't always think about so much with toddlers, but there's a whole learning process that goes on with those interactions with other peers. Well, that speech delay can just be kind of another kind of roadblock for them being able to start learning how to play with others. It can also impact their cognitive development. And this isn't something that we think about, I think as parents, we don't think about this a lot, but language skills are closely tied to our cognitive skills and development. So delayed speech, it can affect a child's ability to process information. It can affect their ability to problem solve. It can affect their ability to, over time, think critically. And this is particularly true for those kids who have those difficulties with comprehension, especially in a learning center. They can often seem like kids who are off task and not listening or paying attention, but oftentimes they're really just not understanding the cues or the words that are being used in that classroom. And I always worry about those kids that have the comprehension issues or the auditory processing issues, because if we don't catch that early and recognize the signs of that, those kids, as they get older, they get pegged as those kids who are distractible, right?
Yeah.
Or that they can't stay focused on task, or they don't listen. And it's not that they don't want to learn and listen and do well. It's that when those words are coming in, they just aren't being processed the same way that they are for other kids. So that's a really big one. And one thing that I think is really important for all of us to understand, and again, this is why I'm so happy to be here talking to you and to other directors and childcare providers, because there are some long term educational impacts of speech delays. Now, the research that's out there says that in general, the majority of kids with a speech delay in the toddler early years catch up by about kindergarten, first grade age. And then there's going to be a handful of kids that don't, and they're going to need more support as they get older and go through those elementary years and sometimes even into high school. But even those kids who caught up, they can show difficulty later on academically, especially with things like reading comprehension. We don't think much about reading and writing as a language skill, but they are language skills. So if I
Mhm.
struggled with it when I was little, then it could potentially impact their ability to do some of those more complex academic things related to that later on in life. And that's why it's so important for us to start early to help provide them with support.
So yeah, so as a teacher, when I put on my teacher hat, I know that reading and writing and all those things are forms of communication and so important when we're working with children and getting them ready for preschool or then kindergarten. And it makes me think of some challenges that we have in the early childhood setting. When we see that and we acknowledge that, when we maybe talk to parents and say, I think it would be a good idea to have your child screened. Sometimes parents are like, nope, nope, my kid's fine. The pediatrician said. And so what I would say is for those of you who are listening who may be parents, and that's usually many of you ladies and gentlemen that work in the field of early childhood education, make sure, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but make sure that we advocate for children, because the longer that it takes to get a child screened and to get them services in place, the more detriment it is to the child and the further behind they fall. And that really is our role as educators. So, and make it easy and convenient. I know in our program, we call the school department and they come out and they'll do screenings right at our center, and they'll do 20 or
Nice.
30 screenings in a day. So, yeah, if your center isn't doing that, you're really not doing a service for your families. Talk to your local school department and see if they can come right to your center and do screenings right there for families. And of course, you have to get the parents' permission, and there's packets for parents to fill out. But it's a really great way to make sure all of your kiddos, or at least 95% of them, are getting screened early. And open your doors too. Some centers might be a little, have reservations about having other professionals come in. I think the more the merrier, the more hands and the more eyes on the kids, the better. The more voices in the meetings, the better. I feel like. So I hope that
I
so many of
agree.
you that are listening to today's episode feel the same way. Jill, can you share some practical strategies or activities that childcare leaders can implement to support toddlers with speech challenges?
Yeah, I like to look at this when we're looking at working on and supporting kids with potential speech delays, as kind of a three-step process, more than just the strategies. Like, to me, the first step is to have a solid understanding of the necessary parts of speech development, like understanding some of the important processes. Not that we all have to be speech experts, but if you're with children all day, with toddlers all day, you want to have a good foundational knowledge of what's developmentally appropriate, and what they should and shouldn't be doing, and how their brains are processing information. So I always tell parents, that, and anybody working with children, that our number one tool that we have is to understand the basics of development. So understanding, like, the foundational language skills, like, there are a set of skills that need to be in place before words are ever going to come. And nobody really talks about these anywhere. There are anywhere between 10 and 20 of them. I break it down into 5. Engagement, so I'm interested in people, I'm interested in things, and I'm interested in my environment. Circles of communication, meaning that I have back and forth interactions with people. It doesn't have to be words, it could just be through play. And then if I'm there with you doing back and forth play, guess what? I'm paying attention to you. Now I can work on comprehension and
Mhm.
understanding, because you have my attention and I'm focusing on you. From
Yes.
there, then we work on
Yes.
initiation, meaning they have to take the lead to let us know that they want things, right? Like pulling us places or handing us things. And then the last one is imitation, and that's imitating our gestures, then imitating our gestures with sounds, and then imitating our gestures with words. So, like, understanding those parts of speech development in young kids that nobody talks about, as well as the developmental milestones that should be in place, the big ones, like, they should have 10 to 15 words by 18 months. They should have 50 words by the time that they're 2. Just kind of as a general reference point. You don't have to know all of them, but just have some of the basics down, so that when you're interacting with a little one, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, he's 18 months and he's only got 2 words. We might need to
Yeah.
give him some extra support. So once we
Yeah.
understand that development and that piece of it, the next thing is then to understand the unique wiring of the child. And this is where that individuality piece comes in, right? Like temperament, we need to understand their temperament. We need to understand their communication preferences. Some kids are the social communicators and they're jibber jabbering all the time. And there are the other kids that are the quiet observers that are like, I'm not going to talk unless I absolutely positively have to. We have to understand that temperament piece, because that then will impact the approach that we use, the strategies that we use. Not every strategy is going to work with every temperament or communication style. We also have to look at the sensory processing piece. Some kids are so busy and in motion all the time that they can't learn because their body won't let them sit still long enough. So we got to address that sensory component and help build the language into that activity, the movement activity, where they're already trying to focus their energies. And then understanding, like, the behavioral piece, the kids that are communicating through meltdowns and tantrums rather than using words. We got to address that, diminish that, so that they can then have more of a calm energy to be able to learn during communication routines. When we understand the development, when we understand the child's unique wiring, and putting the strategies in place become a lot easier, because if a little one is working at not engaged, we're not going to work on comprehension. We're just going to work on you being interested in me. if I'm not able to follow directions or respond to my name, we're not going to work on you naming pictures in a book, right? So when you understand how all of those things work together, then it makes it so much easier to find strategies that work for the child, which then mean less frustration for them and less frustration for the educator.
Yeah, those are all really, really great tips. Jill, I have to tell you, just your face, your body language, you are so passionate
Mm.
about what you're doing, what you're talking about. I know folks listening on the podcast can't see you. So those who want to see her, hop on our YouTube channel. You can tell that Jill lives and breathes this, just the way I do about teaching.
Yeah.
So I can't even believe it's like we have like 5 minutes left. Like
Oh no.
we could really, yes, I know. I don't know how it went so fast. Here's what I'm going to say. I think that we need to have you back on our show, Jill,
Yay.
and book you for an hour because you are absolutely extraordinary. And this
Oh,
is really
thank you.
important a topic because again, this is something that I live and do every day. And I know that our teachers need the support and I know our
Hmm.
children need the support and our families do too. Our children are all everywhere. I don't care how great your center is. Our children everywhere throughout the country, throughout the world are really struggling right now and they are
Hmm.
behind. And so
Hmm.
it is our job, it's our duty really to make sure that our children are supported and that we're doing the right thing. And it doesn't look like it did 5 years ago or 7 years ago. So even our
Yeah.
most experienced educators are struggling. And
Yeah.
so, our voices, we've all got to work together. So I always believe it is a village and it is a village, as corny as it sounds. Jill, can you tell folks where they can connect with you? If they want to reach out to you before we have you on the show again.
Sure.
Tell people
You
where they
can
can find you.
find me on my website, thementormomblog.com. If you go to the mentormomblog.com/resources, you'll find links to all of my social media. I have a YouTube channel where I post lots of information on not just speech development. My two areas that I am so passionate about are speech development in toddlers and then understanding and managing challenging behaviors in toddlers and preschoolers. Those are like my jam. I love behavior and I love speech. So I have lots of videos on my YouTube channel about things from what to do about biting, how to handle hitting, why is this child not playing with other kids, so understanding social play roles. Tons of information on my YouTube channel, but there's also information on my programs and my resources on that resource page, as well as some freebies.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being amazing, amazing guest, Jill. I will message you and we will definitely get you back on the show because I'm sure everybody thoroughly enjoyed listening to this podcast. I know I thoroughly enjoyed being part of this podcast. So thank you so much for all of you who have tuned in today. Thank you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review if you think today's episode was great and it was something that you could put in your toolbox. That's all for today. Have a great day. Bye.